Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tech in EdTech, the show where we explore how technology can power teaching and learning at scale. I'm Zara, and I'll be guiding the conversation. Today, we're getting into XR, extended reality, and what it actually takes to make it work beyond the pilot stage. I'm joined today by Bharani Rajakumar, founder of Transfr. Bharani built Transfr around a pretty clear conviction that immersive, simulation based training can be a real pathway into careers, not just a novelty. Transfr works with school districts, community colleges, and workforce organizations across the country to train people for jobs in healthcare, manufacturing, skilled trades, and much more. Bharani, welcome to Tech and in Tech. Great to have you here.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Excited for the conversation. I'd love to start for you to tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey of how you got into the learning space.
So I got into the learning space based on some personal experiences. I grew up in a family where I watched my parents raise a family of four on $35,000 a year. So I had to get my first job when I was 16 years old so I could contribute. It was in fast food. It wasn't anything glamorous, but I really appreciated the opportunity to earn a paycheck. And I thought it was absolutely amazing. Back then, you'd walk to the bank with your check in hand and you'd sign the back of it and you'd cash it. And it was a really fascinating thing to see, like, oh my gosh, like I earned that. So that was an empowering thing. Um, I ended up working in finance and moved to New York City. And I was just amazed by the resources that were available in the city and across America. But I also, at the same time, knew that resources weren't equally accessible to everybody because the middle school and high school that I went to were like 90% free and reduced lunch. Um, and what I wanted to do is get into education to help kind of solve that problem and make sure that high quality learning experiences were available and accessible to everyone who wanted to learn. Because I believe that when you equip and empower people, um, they're very likely to kind of be on this trajectory of moving upward in life. And so Transfer has a mission of helping everyone get on a pathway to upward mobility. And we do that by helping them, prepare for their first employment opportunity.
Really appreciate you sharing that story and that personal path. That's great, and I love the phrase "equip and empower" students. So, as you built Transfer around this upward mobility and this skills pathway beyond just that wow factor and gamification and things like that that are popular, what was your total vision behind that? You mentioned the mission of Transfer, but anything more particular about how it developed?
Yeah, well, I think kind of being in the communities that I was in, I was both in like kind of these high poverty type of communities where it was a lot of self doubt, a lot of criticism, just a lot of you know folks that didn't feel like they were allowed to be part of the rest of society. At the same time, I was in academically accelerated programs where people felt like they were the creme de la creme, and they had access to anything and everything that they would want. So kind of had one foot in both worlds. And so with transfer, really the focus of using XR as a medium is to be able to put on the headset and be in an environment where it's you and the environment, and you get to kind of feel like you can be successful. You get to try a variety of things that you might have not thought possible, and kind of discover the things that you can be good at, and the things that you like. And so, what is common for us to hear is that people go through the experience and they have an enjoyable experience, and they say, "Holy cow! Like that was the first time I've ever done anything like that." And when they say that, we think, "You mean like virtual reality or XR?" And they're like, "No, like that's the first time like I've done something by myself and been successful at it."
Mm.
In Transfer, there's a digital coach that kind of walks you through what you have to do with no judgment. And I think that it's interesting because people constantly feel like they're being judged. And I think there's like a paranoia in some ways in some communities, and
Yep.
the value of being in a judgment free simulation is that your confidence goes up after you accomplish things. And the whole premise of the company is that you accomplish them in a simulated world, your confidence goes up, and then you do them in real life.
I really love that framing. That's great. So XR has had a really interesting pathway. I feel like when VR first came out, it was more on that experimental side. It was pretty costly. Then we led into this kind of hype era with new headset and it's kind of the shiny new thing. There was, some grant funding and stuff like that. So some schools and different industries purchased it. And then, I think there was that great momentum and I feel like there might have been like there was a little bit of a lull, headsets got dusty, people didn't implement it properly, and we'll deep dive into that implementation piece a bit. But I feel like we're back into that hot moment and some folks calling it the future of education and for a lot of the reasons you just described of how powerful it is with this engagement and this feeling of this wow factor of success and that I can accomplish anything. What gaps do you think right now stand out most to you between that industry narrative and what customers are dealing with right now?
So I think in the early days of all this hardware, like there was just an enormous amount of friction. You had to have an Alienware PC, you had to have a wired connection, sensors, all that stuff. So that has been greatly reduced. So now it's just a wireless device that you can just put on your head or on over your eyes. But still, there's compared with the ease of use of a web app or a mobile app, there's still a meaningful amount of friction. First of all, you just need a different hardware. You need the device, um, and there's controllers. Then being able to log in and be connected to Wi-Fi. So, when one of the challenges I think when you work in the education space is um, the Wi-Fi can be of varying strength depending on where you are in the country, and sometimes depending on where you are in the building. And that's a real point of friction when using this type of technology, especially if you've got to like download the latest and greatest simulation. So I think the other barrier here is that a lot of educators will look at the hardware and just say, look, like I have no idea how to operate that, and then it just doesn't get touched,
Yeah.
right? So there has to be like a real meaningful reward for going through the process of setting up the hardware and using it. And so for us, we focus on the classroom to career pathway, which means, you're able to do career exploration, explore a variety of occupations across all 14 CTE career clusters. And in some cases, it means training for an actual employment opportunity. So I think VR still has room to develop and to become more frictionless. But people do generally agree that the heightened sensation of being in a simulation is just more engaging than watching a traditional video.
100%. And I like that reward piece of connecting it to the classroom into the specific career. And I want to dive into a little bit more about implementation and where you think it's stalling the most in current adoption. What breaks first? Is it, of course, with any tech adoption, like you mentioned, Wi-Fi is an issue and just the devices, all these things that you need. But is there anything else specific you want to point out that it's taking us this long to get to a heavier adoption phase?
I think it comes down to the reward, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's a cool experience for sure, but it has to be something that that people can't live without. And so,
Yeah.
in some use cases, that is true. For example, we work with nonprofits that serve the justice impacted population, so people who are formerly incarcerated, reentry programs, and in those instances, there's a lot of individuals that can't get an interview or can't get on job experience. So using virtual reality as a way to um, build their knowledge, their skills, their confidence is like a really big deal. It's a real powerful way to prepare them for an interview with a real employer. And so that reward is big enough for that use case to succeed. The classroom, like a traditional K-12 classroom, is a little different. Everything revolves around standardized tests. And there are lots of rules and regulations about how classroom time can and cannot be used and how much classroom time there is. So in fact, it might be easier to work with people like after school because there are just fewer rules. So it really depends on like the technology itself is just unequivocally getting better. Like that's not even an argument. Like, it's way better today than it was, 3 years ago. But then deploying it in education, it's really going to come down to like the use case that you're focused on and the segment that you're focused on because every segment is different.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's so many great creative use cases. I love the use case for incarceration and really empower them for reentry and getting back into the workforce. And the after school, and I guess, I had this conversation on career exploration a while back with Tallow, and it connects to how much like in the K-12 system are really starting to integrate that career pathway. And yeah, if it's not integrated and they're not seeing it, or maybe it's just more, there's just so much going on. It's hard to find that path of where this fits in. But I like that after school because if the real reward is focusing on the student and what their options are for career, and they don't even know what's out there, what's possible. And this is a way to explore that and see what else they're good at. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what's really powerful about it is that it works uh very well with some of our highest need populations. So going back to the different communities I was talking about, there's, high, let's say poverty communities and communities where they've got access to all the resources. It is, we just hear over and over again for those individual learner students that aren't part of the traditional system. Let's say like they're not, not necessarily in a magnet program and things like that. Like this is a really, really powerful way for them to learn about things that they've never been exposed to. All people are influenced by the folks that they spend the most amount of time with. And so if you don't have anybody in your family that, works in healthcare or works in advanced manufacturing or that stuff, you might be totally oblivious that those opportunities exist, and they may not necessarily. Not every opportunity requires a 4-year degree or taking on student loan debt, and this just gives people the opportunity to explore those options that they may have not known existed. And the reason that is important because if you're coming from a high need area, it's not uncommon to feel like there is no hope, there is no help, there is no way forward, and this definitely excites people when they see that they've got an opportunity to move upward and onward.
Yeah, that's really, really good, important points, and I think it speaks a lot to kind of what you're trying to accomplish at Transfer and your mission as far as that reach and what the possibilities are here. So I want to dive in a bit to that as far as the creating these real world scenarios. And of course it's amazing impact and there's so many things, but the immersion itself doesn't necessarily create competence. And if we're talking specifically in learning institutions, what do you think, what turns a simulation from something that's is visually impressive and giving students that wow moment to actually improving the world performance?
Well, first and foremost, like the experience should be based on something that, if we're talking about skill development, that
Mhm.
is relevant in the real world. So certainly want to be modeling the experience after things that people do on the job or as part of an apprenticeship program or, as part of safety training. So that's number one. Number two, a lot of these kind of skills were previously taught using traditional e-learning, and then folks would sit down and pass an exam to get a credential. So you want to make sure you have the tasks that are aligned to credentials because if you're working in education, a lot of times things are not funded unless they do align with existing credentials. So those are some pretty straightforward and basic things that can be done to make sure that you move beyond the wow factor to something that can be utilize in the real world. Outside of that, I would say what really matters is focusing on what are like common mistakes and having a deep understanding of like what are common mistakes that people make when they're on the job or when they're new to a certain occupation and training for that. So we have this concept of a digital coach. So there's someone that just talks to you through the entire experience to help guide you through, and that's to just make sure that you're learning the things that we need you to learn in order to do well, either to get the credential or in the interview. So I think those are three important things that should be part of any experience, if you're really focused on helping folks master a skill.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect place to, I talk about this a lot with, health simulations and things. It's the perfect place to try every scenario, right? Like it's a lower risk before you get into that real world scenario. You get to make mistakes and do different things. So thinking about that a bit more, there's assumption, and I think for a very valid reason, as you were saying, that more realistic is better, and particularly in a lot of the trainings and things you're talking about. But how do you decide how much fidelity actually matters before the complexity stops adding learning value? Like, is there a point there?
I think from the customer's perspective, it comes down to cost, especially in education and training. If the difference is spending two or three times as much to get it to be perfect versus just having something that gets the job done and helps people acquire the skills um and move forward in their learning, they're usually going to choose the path that gets the job done, because there are really powerful and expensive headsets or these high quality game engines that can produce things that just look completely lifelike.
Yeah.
But if it's going to cost 3 to 5 times more than like, let's say, something that doesn't require all that technology, people are going to pick the lower cost option, I think.
Yeah, and there's still so many benefits, but it doesn't need to be like totally immersed in the room. And on the flip side, I think a lot of providers are now trying to push more content in XR because it sounds innovative. This is a cool thing to do. Do you find that there's more skills that genuinely benefit more from the medium and some that are more forced?
That is a good question. One of the things that you always hear um, folks talk about in the world of skills is soft skills or executive function.
Mhm.
And I think that is one of those areas where it does not necessarily have to be done using XR if it can be done just as well using a mobile phone or mobile device. Right. And so I think that's one of the areas that, from my perspective, like it is certainly interesting when it's in virtual reality, but that's not the only medium that you can do that in. Versus if you are um, transporting someone to a hospital so they can work on a patient, or transporting them to a construction site where it's super dangerous. Like that is where, virtual reality is like really powerful.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've gotten that question a lot recently, more on the like just speak with the healthcare side of folks asking for, oh, we need those patient communication skills, those interactive skills. And I think it's a really good point you bring up. Like, you don't necessarily need that medium to like talk, practice communication. You could do that on a phone. You can do that. But I guess it's just feeling like you're in the room with the patient or something like that. Of course, it's going to help. But, if you're trying to decide where to implement and where not, if there's different barriers. So I want to switch gears a little bit to dive in a little bit more on the technical side. So once the headset arrives, the work begins, and of course any technology implementation there's going to be hurdles. You talked about a few of them already, but there's the technical hurdles, logistical, even political hurdles. Is the end user actually part of the buying decision, and then of course the financial hurdle. Which one do you think, or is there one that kills the momentum most?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think the one that probably creates the most friction is the how do I integrate this into my day to day, right? Like people generally think that XR is like a really cool technology, really cool medium, but it can't be something that folks have to like totally change the way that they go about their day or go about their class or go about their teaching. Because if it does become that, then they're not going to use it. So there is a lot of money that is spent on workforce development and Title One and things like that. But at the end of the day, the educators are the ones on the ground floor. They're the ones that have the most contact with the learners. And so if they don't feel that it's something ridiculously easy to use, they're not going to use it. And if they're not going to use it, it's not going to get funded.
Is there anything else you would recommend before, like a district or college or any workforce provider launches? What internally needs to happen for, say a pilot goes well, then what's next? What needs to align then to keep it going?
There's got to be someone whose responsibility or whose job it is to execute the program, right? If nobody owns the implementation, it's not going to be implemented. And XR is still a newish technology in education, and so it's not like there's like a dedicated role for this. Like there's always going to be a dedicated role for teaching math or teaching science, but there's not a dedicated role for making sure everyone has this completely connected experience from exploring careers to enrolling in a pathway, and ultimately, getting in an interview with an employer. There's different roles from counselors to teachers to people who run career fairs and stuff like that, but there isn't like one person that owns the entire thing end to end.
Yeah, and I guess it's being clear on the expectations from the beginning, right? Because there's a lot of times, wanting it to do everything or thinking it's you're gonna spend all this money, you're gonna do this, like, well, I need to prove this ROI. And unless you set real clear goals and expectations and how it's gonna be used and where, then you can start being able to track that engagement and what that retention and those outcomes look like. And that accountability, and I think you already got to one of my questions of where it's accountable, and I think wherever it's decided, it's kind of needs to be all in as far as where, and clear on what that is.
Yeah, totally.
And you've said, I've heard you mentioned before that XR alone doesn't solve that last mile problem. And when a learner then exits the simulation, they have that wow moment. They get really excited, rejuvenated about what the possibilities are. What's the next step? What needs to still happen for that experience to translate into a real opportunity?
You have to have the employer buy-in up front, right? Like if there are no employers involved in designing the program or implementing the program, there's no connection between the classroom and the career. Like it's just like a purely academic thing at that point if there's no employers involved. So that is definitely the end all be all, I would say, is having employers participate in selecting which simulations are relevant and helping learners kind of see what the point of all the learning is. Like, hey, at the end of the day, like these are the opportunities that exist in the community and the pathways and occupations that are available when you finish.
Yeah, that connection to community and what's going on in that learner's full ecosystem, what's around them. Been to recent conferences and things like that. And it's you gotta have, if you're building out this program without talking to the employers and the thing and the folks in your area, the actual jobs that are available in the area, then there's a disconnect with what students are learning and what their expectations will be once leaving.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what's next for XR. You've clearly made moves to reduce hardware dependence with the launch of Transfer Tech, a web application. How do you think that balancing the immersive fidelity of VR against accessibility and scale that browser-based tools can offer? Where does that line sit for you right now?
Yeah. So Transfer Trek was something that we developed to make sure the conversation around career exploration and training kind of continued outside of the headset. So, and we also added things like financial literacy and all, and things that are related to selecting a career, and certainly related to your decisions you make about your pathway to upward mobility. And not all those learning experiences require an immersive hands-on experience, and so that's why we can use mobile and laptops and things of that nature, more like traditional e-learning type of technologies. But and along with that, you can kind of implement the standard kind of screen readers and things like that help address some of the accessibility issues that are really needed to drive adoption. I think one of the challenges, though, is that watching things on a 2D screen, it's just a different level of engagement than kind of being in the environment and having that real time interaction with objects and learning from your mistakes in real time. So while I think the 2D screen is really powerful for like theory based knowledge and that kind of content, it's the only thing better than a simulated hands on experience is the real thing. The reason the simulated hands on experience works and is valuable is because sometimes the real thing isn't accessible. Like, especially if you're, let's say, you're under 18 or you are uninsured and don't have the safety knowledge or tools or anything to climb on top of a wireless tower, a broadband tower. So I think having a connected experience between mobile, web, and the headset is really important. It doesn't, it's going to be impossible to kind of replace that immersive experience.
Of course, but I like how, the accessibility, of course, at Magic, we love, making it inclusive, and you're just trying to add more learners to who might not be able to experience the full XR experience. So if we talk about what it looks like down the road, so if we strip away both this utopian and doom narratives, like both extremes, where do you see XR becoming more normal, like an unremarkable part of education and workforce training over the next 3 years?
I do think the focus right now is on opportunities that do not require a 4-year degree, where you've got like rapid training programs. There's a real demand right now for roles in advanced manufacturing and the skilled trades, electricians, that kind of thing. And, employers don't have 2 to 4 years to wait to develop the workforce. There's all kinds of projects that are going on, whether it's broadband, installing broadband for rural America, or building data centers that power AI. I mean, there's just a huge need for folks with these skills sets right now, and that's where XR as a medium can be really powerful to help rapidly train someone to maybe not be an expert, but to be good enough to be employable. And once they're employable, employers kind of continue the training on the job.
Absolutely agree. That's great. Okay, we're at the lightning round. I just have a few set of questions here, so go ahead and fire out whatever comes to mind.
All right.
Okay, what's one XR myth you'd like to retire immediately?
I would say maybe the biggest myth is that it will make you vomit and give you vertigo. I mean, we work with lots of individuals who kind of think that and feel that, or maybe they get motion sickness. But when they use our experience, it's fine. And so I think it really does come down to the production quality and what the experience is, because if your experience is you put on the headset and you're going for a roller coaster ride, like, that's going to make a lot of people nauseous. But if your experience is you're putting on the headset and you're learning how to bend conduit, that's a lot different. So I would say the number one myth is that you put on the headset and it's going to make you puke. It may, but it probably depends on who the production quality of what you're experiencing.
Great. Yeah, I love that one. Really good one. I get motion sickness, but I've never felt that when I've had a headset on. So, what's one buyer question that instantly tells you they understand the category?
Which employers do you think we can bring to the table that this will apply to? Which occupations is this going to be the most effective for?
Mm, perfect. One thing the industry still overestimates about XR.
The ease of use. I think when folks are doing a demonstration and there's someone there helping you go through the process, people are totally enamored with the experience, and so that might lead to a purchase. But if you don't have a dedicated team member who owns the outcome end to end and making sure that it's implemented properly, things can fall apart.
And one thing it still underestimates about implementation.
Just the magnitude of change it can drive, like the speed at which it can help somebody become ramped up and productive and employable is like massively underestimated.
Mhm. Great. Wrapping things up here, if a district college or a workforce provider wants to make, say, one smarter decision this year on XR, what do you think that should be?
It should be around how do you create space to innovate a new type of program. What I mean by that is education is always hamstrung by all these rules and regulations to get a certificate and qualify for a credential of value and pass tests and stuff like that. Employers don't care about any of that stuff. They want to know that someone is ready to work, which means that they're self motivated, they're a good communicator, and they're reliable. And that stuff doesn't show up on a credential. And so being able to rethink what a program looks like in your building or in your community that helps establish trust with the employer so that they want to come back, month after month or semester after semester, year after year, and have that recruiting pipeline. I mean, that would be a powerful role for education to play.
Amazing. Love that answer. I think that is a great place to end here. Thank you so much, Bharani.
Hey,
It was
thank you. Thanks for having me.
absolutely. So that's a wrap on today's episode of Tech and Ed Tech. Huge thanks to Bharani for a candid conversation on what it actually takes to make immersive learning work past the demo, past the pilot, and into something that moves people into real careers. We'll drop the link in the show notes. This episode was useful. Please follow or subscribe. I'm Zara, and this is Tech and Ed Tech. See you next time.